Okay, okay, we will continue. Right, now let's look at what are these if-else conditions and other things, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time because you have all done these things many a times, right? If conditions, while loops, etc. Okay. Okay, so let's do few examples, just few examples. Let's have a look at it actually. So this is how with the if-then, if-else work. Unlike Java, we have if your condition, you can refer to your variables, right? Then you can have any number of statements. There's nothing called curly bracket or whatever. You can have any number of statements. Then you have to end it with end if, and there's semicolon here. Okay, it's a big if statement. This is another example. If say there's a variable called color, of course you have to use a single quotes or whatever. Then dbms output like this, else you do that. Okay, anyway, this one has else also, right? So then you can have else if, right? Else if is one word. You can have any number of else if statements like this. Again, you don't have to need any begin end. In between else if and else, or in between else if is all the statement belonging to that else if. Okay. Right, so this is another sort of example, and anyway, this is hard-coded example, and this is not a stored procedure. That is the other thing. You don't always need to have a stored procedure to try out things. For example, you can run even something like this also. Okay, something like this. It's not a stored procedure. It's just a code snippet. Okay. Right. So this is, we have a variable and initialize. This is not a stored procedure. This is just a code string. So what this kind of things can be within stored procedure also. Then it is reusable. And we are just hard coding it to 100. Okay. So since we are hard coding it to 100, it must go into the else part, right? Else part. None of the value is matching. Okay. So then of course the value is split. Okay, let's run it. You can see none of the value is matching. It has gone to the else part. If it is something like 30, it will go into the A is 30 because it has come into the this one. Okay, right. I hope you can understand that. So then there are basic loops. There's something called case statements also. Actually, I forget to add an example on case statement. I have given you the link below to the tutorial that I referred. That is a very famous tutorial. Really superb tutorial is there in the tutorials point. Just go to the tutorials point tutorial and make sure you do another example on case statement also, right? So this is the tutorial, right, which is a superb tutorial. It's always, I highly recommend you to go through. If you want, you can just mark it home, right? So look at all those things: operators, conditions, loops, even arrays, procedures, functions, cursors. It's always good to have a look at records and exceptions also, because we never know, right? The examiners are these days very very advanced. So I highly recommend you to look at everything. Look at everything, because I am going to cover more than 75% of this. Just another 25% I just kept it because it is not mentioned in your note, but I highly recommend you to go through the entire thing. Okay, right. So I just giving you the startup. Okay, and so let's get back to our original discussion on if else. Right, so then you can have loops, right? There are three type of loops. The basic loop, it is sort of a never ending loop. You start with loop and then we say end loop. So there's only way to get out of this loop is you must have a exit statement. So that is called basic loop. So this is just example. This is not a stored procedure, just a normal code snippet, PL/SQL code snippet. Right, so this one we are declaring a variable x, which is number, hard coded to 10. Then we have loop. Let me indent it. Right, so this is my end if. Yeah. So we are just keep checking whether x is greater than 50. If it is greater than 50, we are going to exit the loop. Okay. And all the time we are incrementing x by 10. So initially it will be 10, and then 20, 30, 40, and 50 will also print. But next time it is after 50 is print, it will be 60. So 60 is greater than 50. Therefore, it is going to get out of the loop, and it is going to say after exit x is. Okay, let's run it. And so it's a basic loop where you have to exit it using exit statement in if conditional way. Okay. Right, so then we have the while loop. It is just like any other while loop that you find it in Java or PHP or whatever. I'll just quickly go through an example. But these things are done with database calls, okay? So, but we are just familiarizing with the concept. Right? So this one is printing 10 to 19, right? So 20 is also print. So 19, yeah, 10 to 19, right? Yeah, 10 to 19. So that you can understand. Okay, that you must be able to understand because you are in final year. Then the for loop is there. This for loop is slightly different from the Java for loop. It's more like the Python for loop. Right. So this goes from 10 to 20. Default increment is 1. So that means 10, 11, 12, 13. If you have fixed number of times, this for loop can be used. Okay. Right. So then we are coming to very serious stuff for your exam, right? So we set up the background so far, right? The cursor. So cursor is, there are two types of cursors, the implicit cursor and explicit cursor. Cursor is a pointer, right? Pointer to a record. Mostly we use it as a pointer to a record or to some other concept like number of records, whether we found a record or not, something like that. Those are the implicit cursors, but in explicit cursors, most of the time your cursor will be referring to a result set. That result set we should be able to iterate, go by one, record by record. But that result set may be due to a select statement. Maybe you join few tables and blah blah blah. Then you get the record, right? So then we go through the records to search something or something like that. So then the cursors are extremely important. Okay, right. Now let's first look at what are the implicit cursors available. So these are the implicit cursors available in Oracle. Found, not found, of course, that is the opposite of that. Then is open is there, whether the cursor is still open. The row count will give you how many rows are there as in our cursor or our result. Okay, so let's do a quick example of use of implicit cursor. So I have to put a few more lines, and it involves a database call as well. And we are always using our employee table. Right. So what does this do? So this is a stored procedure. So therefore we have to call it later. We call it update salaries. Okay. And the stored procedure has a variable called total rows. And we are doing update. We are doing update on the employee table. So what is that? But let me. Okay. Let me format this. Okay. Right. So what we do? We do update. We do update. That is a normal update statement. So basically, we are updating the each employee's salary by 50,000. So each employee's salary is incremented by 50,000. Right. So that is because in stored procedures you can write any SQL statement: insert, update, delete, whatever. Okay. Not just you can write any number of SQL statements. So then when you do a SQL, execute a SQL statement, okay. So there are implicit cursors. Implicit cursors. So here you access it using SQL $. So this is the cursor not found. Right? Not found means no record has been updated. So then someone will ask which SQL statement? The last executed statement. So the last executed statement say nothing has been updated or no record has been affected. So then it will be not found. Okay. But if it has affected at least one record, it will be found. Then the found is true or the not found is false. So then we have another implicit cursor called row count. Remember, found, row count, those are the implicit cursors available. Right? Found, not found, row count. Okay. So the row count implicit cursor has the number of rows affected. Earlier, whether it is affected or not. Now this is number of rows affected. Now we are printing that one. We are taking it to a variable and printing that rows. Of course, this is going to go into the else if because this update statement is going to affect because we have two records in our employee table. Okay, it's going to go into the else if and because the found is going to be true. Okay, found is going to be true and the row count is going to be found is going to be true and the row count is going to be 2. Okay, let's run it. And so first we are deploying the stored procedure. Okay, we are not running, we are deploying the stored procedure. Okay, why is invalid? Oh, right. I can put you see me current one. Right now, you know, I can hurry. Now let's call this. I'm just copy pasting because I don't want to spend a lot of time. So it's just a begin and then calling the stored procedure because no parameter and nothing. Why is that?
So excuse.
Yes.
End එකට පස්සේ semicolon එකක් දාන්න.
Oh, forget about that. Yes, thank you. Right. So now we can see that it says 2 employees selected. So why we are getting 2 employees selected? Because it has gone to the else if part, and this the total rows is from the row count implicit cursor, and also the found implicit cursor has given me true. Found that is why it came to the else if part. So now here we use 2 implicit cursors of the last SQL statement. The found, of course, the not found has given false, and the row count. So here you have to refer to it as SQL percentage, okay, in Oracle. Okay, right. So those are implicit cursors. So we are more interested in, of course, the implicit cursor also they might ask. We are more interested in explicit cursors. Okay, right. Explicit cursors are cursors that we use to iterate through records. Right? Iterate through records. If a select statement gives more than one record, we can always use cursors. Right? We always use cursors to iterate through it. Okay. Right. First, you have to declare a cursor. It's something like a variable, but it's a cursor variable. Okay. This is how you declare a cursor. Cursor is a keyword. You can give it a name. Then you have to say is a particular select statement. That select statement can be anything, even joins. Right? It doesn't matter. Right? It can be taken. You may be taking record for more than one tables using joins. That is also fine. The cursor is keeping the record set. Okay, cursor is keeping the record set. Right. So then you have to open the cursor using the keyword open. Okay. So then you can take record, the values of the record, individual record using fetch. And you can, usually we will do it in a loop because there will be multiple records. Okay, if you are pretty sure that only one record is there, you can just call it fetch without a loop. But usually it will be a loop. And finally, when you are done, you can close the cursor. So that is you are releasing the memory and other things. Okay, right. So don't worry. When you do example, you can understand it perfectly. Okay, so let's quickly do. Right. So these are some variables, right? Right. So we have few variables, EID. Why we are putting E underscore is because if it is something to be the column name, sometimes it will give you errors. So therefore, that is why most of the time we want to differentiate with our field name. So therefore, we just give it some thing, but it's not always the case. But sometimes it can give error. So therefore, we try to give it a different name than the field name, column name. Okay. Right, EID employee. Now, this is another way of defining. So far, when we are declaring a variable, we give hard code the data type. We just say number or vacha. But there's a better way, especially when you are working with cursors. If you are going to take a field of a record to that variable, the best thing is you can give it, say that this is the this variable's data type must be the data type of this particular field. So then you don't have to worry at all, right? So therefore, what we are saying is the data type of this EID, usually we just have to say number, whatever. We say that employee tables ID fields data type. Okay, so we have to do that. Employee tables, ID fields data type is the data type for the EID, and name, employee tables, name fields data type. Salary, employee tables, salary fields data type. And we are now having cursor also. Cursor, you can give it a name, this is simple, select ID name salary from employee. Okay. So make sure don't use star, just give the name, right? That is usually the star is not very readable. Okay. So then we know exactly what are the fields, ID, name, and salary. Okay. Right. So now we are into the body of the stored procedure. So first of all, what you have to do, if you're working with the data cursor, you have to open it. So when you open, basically, this select statement is already created now, already executed, right? Already executed. Now you are opening the cursor. So that cursor has the result of the select statement. So then this kind of statement may have maybe 10 records, 100 records, sometimes no records. So we don't know. So therefore, since we don't know how many records are there, usually we go for loop. And that is where with this, the default loop is really handy, right? Default loop is really handy. You are using the default loop and end loop. So then we are fetching, right? Your cursor name, cursor variable name into, if you have 3 fields here, you can just give the corresponding variables where ID must be assigned to, name must be assigned to, salary must be assigned. So that is why we gave them the data type of these fields. And we are saying into EID, ename, salary. You have to give it in the proper order, because this is ID, name, salary. So therefore, we are setting it into EID, ename, salary. Okay. And so that will fetch the next record. Of course, if it is the first loop, first iteration, it will be the first record. So then we never know whether the loop we are into the final record. So therefore, what we do is we are using that implicit cursor not found. So in this case, we are not using SQL because it's a cursor. The cursor name percentage not found. Now you can see this explicit cursor is also there. Now we are using the implicit cursor also. So then we are saying that exit when employee percentage not found. So when you fetch, if there are no record to fetch, so that means it comes here and it is going to exit the loop, right? Or else, okay, or else we are just printing the EID, ename, and the salary, our variables. Okay, our variables. And this is a loop. So therefore, this is going to the first record, second record, third record, and maybe if you have only 3 records, 4th times, it is when you call the fetch, it is not found. So therefore, it is going to exit. So it's naturally going to exit. Okay. Right. So that is how you work with the cursor. And also, once we end the loop, we close the cursor. So that is a best practice, right? Always open the cursor, fetch it at any time, any number of times, as long as you have the next record, preferably in a loop. and make sure you exit when it is not found, and make sure after exit you close it. Okay, after exit you close it, or you write it in if else and close and exit, whatever you want. Okay, right. So this is almost all the time when you are working with cursors, you will be using this pattern. Cursor is there, you open it, in a loop you fetch it, if it is not found you exit, and make sure you close it. And inside whatever you want with that data, you can do it. Maybe you are looking for some data, maybe you want to do some insert using the values there, or whatever you want. So it depends on the requirement. Okay. Now let's store this stored procedure. Right. So the right, now let's call it. It's just a normal call, because it's printing the records in the employee table one by one. In my case, I have only one record. So 2 records are there in the employee table. Okay. So therefore, we must be getting 2 records. Yeah, so there you don't need slash. You can see the 2 records. So that came from the stored procedure, because in the stored procedure, we take it to the cursor, we open the cursor, we loop through it, and we exit when the records are no longer there. Okay, so we had only 2 records, so that is why we got this, because remember we insert only 2 records. Right, so that is how we work with cursor. Working with cursor is extremely important. Okay, extremely important. Right, any questions on cursors? So we are pretty much done with stored procedures. Okay, so this knowledge is enough, but I will show you one more thing, that record type. I think they had asked about the records. I did add it to the note, but this is really important. Packages you don't need, because it is more PLS, because the examiner try to ask questions in the general areas where it is common to Oracle or MySQL or whatever, right? But he gives the answers in Oracle syntax. Okay, but at the same time he try to give you only general questions where because he don't want to go into the specific technologies that only Oracle is having. But this record type is important. Actually, I forget to add it to your note, right? Right. So it's very simple, right? It's very simple. When you are selecting something, right? Selecting something, just like the column. Remember, we had something field types here. We just say it is the employee tables ID type. ID type. Similarly, you can say it is, say, customer tables row type. Okay, let's do this as example. This is not a stored procedure. This is just a code snippet. Right. In our case, we don't have a customer table. What we have is the employee table. Therefore, I'm changing it. Select all into say employee rec. But if you go for row type, you have to make sure that you are getting only one record. Otherwise, you have to go for cursor. Okay, so that is very important. So you have to, if you are pretty sure that you are getting only one record, that means your where condition is filtering it by the primary key, right? So then only go for this, right? Row type. Okay. Now we are filtering it by the ID. ID is obviously our primary key. Therefore, we are not going to get more than one record. In our case, we have only ID 1 and 2. So therefore, I'm just changing it to say 2. We have the ID, name, and salary. Okay, we don't have the address, and let's call it employee. Okay, I will update the note and giving back to you maybe tomorrow. Okay, with this particular example also. Okay, right now let's run it. This is not a, of course, these kind of things you can do it in stored procedure, but this is just whatever we do in these kind of places, you can do it in stored procedure. Okay, but we are just straight away running it. Okay, we got the second record, 2 Bimal. If it is 1, we are going to get Amal, right? Amal. So that is, if you know that we are going to get only one record, you can use the row type. right? Row type, and you can take that into a set of once you take it to that variable, right? Now you can access the individual. You don't need a cursor. So cursor is neat when you have more than one record. Of course, when you have only one record, also you can use the cursor. Only thing is the cursor is going to be executed only one iteration. But if you 100%, if you know that you are going to get one record, it's easier to use this row type and work with rather than using cursor. Okay, so that is an additional thing. Right, so that's it about stored procedures. We'll do the past papers after doing triggers also, because the past paper questions are mixing stored procedures, triggers, constraints all together into one question. Okay, right. Triggers. Now, triggers are very easy to understand, and most of the stuff we do with stored procedure, or not most of the stuff, some of the stuff we do it in stored procedures can be doing triggers also. Right, what is mean by trigger? So you know what is a trigger is, because we discussed that in semester 2 also, right? You know what trigger is coming from. Trigger. Usually when we have pistol or something weapon, we say that we trigger it, right? We trigger it, something like that. So we trigger it and all of a sudden there's a firing. So that is why we call it triggers. So triggers will trigger, right, on certain actions on your database, right? For example, you can write a trigger on insert, or trigger on update, on delete, something like that. So whenever you insert a record, the trigger is going to be triggered. Now stored procedures, we have to call. We store it, we call it. But triggers, we don't have to call it, right? So triggers, we have to just set up there, deploy there, and trigger is going to be triggered automatically. That is a difference. Okay, but it's going to be triggered, right? So what kind of things we can do with triggers, right? Maybe we can do additional validation. Especially triggers are heavily used for logging. So every time when some sort of action is happened to a table, say whenever there's update to a particular field, we want to write to a log file. So triggers are used. Even for default logging, they use triggers internally, right? So one of the biggest usage of triggers is logging. Other than that, there can be some policies. Whenever you do update this, maybe you want to write to this table, or you want to do that check, blah blah blah. So we can use triggers, because triggers we don't call. It will be triggered on that particular event. Okay, right. So there are three parts in a trigger: trigger, event, condition, action. What is the event? Is it insert or update or delete? Then the condition, under which condition you want to trigger it, and what do you want to do if the condition is satisfied on that trigger. Okay, right. So, and also there are timing. If it is insert, you can trigger it before insert or after insert. So before insert means before inserting you do this, and then you do the insert. After insert means first you do the insert to the table, then you do this logic. Same thing is there for update and delete. Okay. And the conditions are additional things where only if that condition is satisfied, trigger is going to execute the action. Otherwise, the action is going to be skipped. Okay. Right. So there are two types of triggers: the row triggers and the statement triggers. So the row triggers are for row level triggers. Every time a particular record is insert, or particular record is updated, or one record is deleted, row triggers are going to be triggered, right? Whereas the statement triggers are for more than one statements and that kind of a situations. Okay, statement triggers. Right. So how to work with the triggers? So this is how you write a trigger, right? Create or replace. Right. We'll again do a practically, right? Because that is the best way to do it. Right? Do things in a practical manner. rather than just looking at the theory. Okay, right. So here I have added the latter part. Okay, because I never got a chance to set up the flow properly, and since you are the last in the whole syllabus, I didn't want to spend a lot of effort to update the this document, because anyway the new syllabus students are having different syllabus. Okay, right. So again, I'm assuming that this particular table is there with data. Okay, so we already have this table. So let's see how to create a trigger. So we are not going to do a lot of examples because triggers are not that complicated. Let me deploy this trigger first, then I will explain. Okay, so we are going back to our SQL. So I'm doing it faster because if this session expired again, I have anyway, it's not a big thing. I just have to create the table and insert 2 records. Okay, so if you keep it for maybe 1 hour, then the session will be expired. All your stored procedures, right, tables will be lost. Okay, because this is a sort of a public cloud. Right? This is just for people to come and play around and try to familiar with Oracle. Okay. Right, so this is how the trigger code looks. Create or replace trigger, right? Trigger. Now it is not create or replace stored procedure function. You can give it a name. So this one is display salary changes trigger, and we are saying this trigger has to happen before delete or insert or update, or you can just say before delete, right? Or before delete or insert or whatever. You can use or statement if you want to do it for more than 1 events. Okay, so this is going to happen before deleting a record, inserting a record, or updating a record. Basically those are the 3 things, right, other than the select, right? So this trigger is going to be fired. So then when you're writing triggers, if it is a row trigger, make sure you write for each row statement, right? For each row. Then this is the additional condition. So this says that this is a row trigger because maybe you are inserting multiple records. Maybe your update statement is going to affect 5 records. So that is why we are saying for each row, right? So this trigger has to be triggered for each row that you are going to update as part of your SQL statement, each record that you are going to insert, or each record you are going to delete. And maybe the one delete statement says delete from employee where department ID is 5. So then there may be 5 or 10 employees. So each row we have to do it. That is why we say for each row. This is additional condition. This is optional. So this says when the ID is greater than 0. Right? When the ID is greater than 0. Of course, usually you don't have the IDs less than 0 anyway. Right? Right. Now, rest of the stuff is pretty much like the stored procedure, but there are some restrictions as well as some new things as well. Okay. So this is where you declare your variables. You can declare any number of variables, even the cursors and other things also, record types also. So then you have the begin and end. Okay, begin and end. Right. And also you can use if else conditions, loops, right? You can use whatever you use with your stored procedures. And here there's a special thing, that is, now if it is update, there's a before value, after value. Say you're updating the salary. Now say already there's a salary value. Say already a particular record has salary value 1 lakh, 100,000. Now we are going to change it to 100,000, 50,000, sorry, 150,000. So the old value is going to be 100,000 and new value is going to be 150,000. So therefore, if you want to refer to old value, make sure you have the colon old dot your field, right? Your field. If it is the new value you want to refer to, colon new dot your field. Okay, your field. So that field can be anything because you are always triggers are bound to a table. You can see Unlike stored procedures, it's a general concept. You can refer to this table, that table, other table, but triggers are for one particular table. Right? One trigger is for one table. Of course, you can have multiple triggers for one table, but a particular trigger is for particular table. And therefore, you can just refer to your fields without referring to any table name, because your trigger is already bound to a table. So therefore, this is our employee table. This is bound to the employee table. So employee table has salary. And new means the salary that we are getting from the SQL statement. Of course, if it is insert statement, you have only new value. There's nothing called old value. But if it is update, there's a new value and old value. Right? If it is delete, there's only old value. There's no new value. Okay. But we are referring to both new value and old value. We are first checking whether old value of the salary is null. Okay, null, because otherwise in insert, this will be empty. This will be empty. Okay. So therefore, we just check whether it is null. If it is null, we are calculating the salary difference. So of course, the salary difference is going to be the new value because this is the first time you are inserting. Else, the salary difference is the new value of the salary minus old value of the salary. Right? So that is obvious. And then we are printing the old value of salary, new value of salary, and the salary difference. So salary difference, we took it to a variable. Or you could have used the row type. So not the row type, the column type of that field also, right? Referring to that table name, blah, blah, blah. But here we hard coded to make our life easier. So this is just a logging. I told you that triggers are heavily used for logging purposes. So this is every time a salary is updated, salary of field is updated in the employee table, we are just logging into a standard output. Right? So we just have to deploy the trigger. We don't have to call the trigger. Whenever you do an insert, delete to update, this trigger is going to be triggered. That is why we call it triggers. Okay, right. Let's first deploy the trigger. I hope you got it. Make sure you refer to the new or old if you are referring to fields. Okay, right. So let's run it. It's a false warning. Right. I got the trigger created now. Now the trigger has been created. Now remember, this trigger is going to be triggered for insert, update, and delete. Okay, so let's do a insert and okay, we have only two records, right? So let's do update and see. Okay, so I'm going to do that here. It's just update, right? Update employee, say set salary equal, let's say salary plus, we are just incrementing, plus 50,000. Where, let's restrict it, ID equal 1. Okay, ID equal 2. Remember, we have ID 1 and ID 2. Right now, since we are doing update, this trigger is for update as well. So therefore, this trigger has to be triggered. Okay, if this triggered, we must get this particular output to standard output. Okay, now let's see. And it's going to happen for only once because it's going to affect only one row. Right, now you can see that one row is updated, that is the normal output we got. You can see all salary is this, new salary is this. Okay, and the salary difference is 50,000. Now if I update this again, the old salary is going to be 2,50,000, new salary is going to be 300,000 or 3 lakh. Okay, you can see. So it's just logging. And if I skip this where condition, it's going to affect both the records. Okay, so let's see whether that is also happening. Now you can see that this has incremented to 4 lakh. This one 150,000 has incremented to 200,000. Okay, let's do it again. Now we can see that. So that is why we say for each row, right? For each row. Okay, right. So Hope you got it. So, and if I do an insert, still we are going to do getting it, because this trigger is, I have marked it for insert as well. Okay, let's do insert. Insert into employee. Let's assume the default the thing. The ID is 3. A name is Amal Bimal, say Kamal. Let's give the salary 200,000 and see whether trigger is triggering. Okay, let's write the field names also. Values kira giyanna onne. Values. Right. Now you can see old value is blank, obviously, because this is insert, and new salary is this one. Okay. Right. So now let's delete. Now delete karo. Delete from employee where ID equal 3. And trigger has to be triggered. Oh, why not? Trigger unna ne? Delete ekada ayye. Delete or insert or update. One row is deleted also. I think because this new value is greater than 0, right? So there's no new value when you are deleting, right? So I think therefore it has effectively prevent this happening for delete, triggering for delete. So shall we delete that? I think that is not making sense, because then it is not working for the insert delete. Let's run it and see whether I think that is not a must. Okay, now let's delete and see. ID equal 2, because we have 2 more records. Now you can see the old salary is there. There's no new salary. Okay, so therefore there's a new salary difference also, right? Because we are just deleting it. Right, so something like that. Or you can say, if the new salary is greater than this much only, you change it, right? Something like that you can do. Okay, this trigger. Okay, right. So okay, that is the only example we do. Okay, now let's quickly go through your UCSC note, right? Because, but don't worry, they are always referring to Oracle syntax for the exam. So far, I can't assure for the last 2 years or the last 3 years that is the case. Okay. They don't have it. They have removed that. I told you that that slides are confusing, so they have taken it out. No, it's there, right? No, there's no teacher's note, right? Yeah, there's no teacher's note. Just a discussion and blah blah blah, right? Okay, let's not go through your teacher's note, well, because they have removed that teacher's notes also, because I told you it was referring to Microsoft SQL, because that note make you more confusing, right? Confusing, right? So let's do some past paper question. So they have taken it out. That is good. Actually, that is good. They have taken it out. So let's do a few past paper questions. Okay. So each year you get 1 question. So let's start with 2020 paper. And this is very easy question. If you understand the thing, make sure you go through the entire tutorial here. Okay. Entire tutorial. You don't need to go for object oriented, right? But no need to go for transactions, or you better go for transaction also. We never know, they will ask us because the transaction you have it, right? But all the other things, actually I went through almost all the things, okay, but I did go through a lot of examples, okay. Right, now let's go to your past paper questions, okay. Right, 2020 paper, question 1. Right, so this is the you can see 3 tables they have given. Employee table, so mark anything interested for you. So the primary key is employee ID, right? Primary key is employee. Here you have the PID for the project. You can see there are different notations. Here they use this notation to make primary key. Here they use, because all are valid. And performance, we have the employee ID, again primary key. Okay. Right. So change the SQL script to enforce an additional constraint called CK salary. So that means you have to add another constraint. Right. It says change the SQL script, right? Rather than update, you just have to change the create table statement. Okay. That would be applied to check whether the salary of all the employees are between 15,000 and 115,000. So that you don't have to write a trigger. You can just add a check constraint to the table. We did that in semester 2. Okay. So, I think for you guys, semester 1. And you can just have a check salary greater than 15,000 and less than 150,000. So just have a check in your, you can add it to the field, or you can just add it as a constraint, right? So this is for salary. You can add it as here also, you can add it check blah, blah, blah. Okay. And see, check salary is less than 50,000 and salary is greater than 150,000. So now you can see that the examiner has written as an alter table, but that is a very unfair thing because it says change the SQL script. So now this is your SQL script. I thought we have to change this SQL script, but the answer is, assuming that all the tables are created, you have to write a alter statement. That is very, I hope the examiner will give marks for if you just change this, because when you say change the SQL script, usually what it means is the script is given, you have to change the relevant place. So therefore, I just thought we have to write it here, but the examiner has written it as assuming that the table is there. Now you are writing update. But anyway, the this part is not going to be changed. Right? Check blah blah blah. It can be, if it is a create statement, you can add it here. Okay. So here they have given constraint a name also. That is also a good thing because then it's easier to drop it. Right? Drop it. So alter table employee add constraint, your constraint name. What is that constraint is doing? Check the right this. Second one, change the SQL script. That means they are expecting update. Okay. Change the SQL script to enforce additional constraint called UC employee. Now they are giving the name also, right? So that constraint that would ensure NIC and EPF columns will not have duplicate values. So that means you have to write it separately because it is not specific to one field. So therefore, you have to give it a name, and always you have to give it a name and write it separate. But you can refer to the fields in your constraints. Again, you don't have to write a stored procedure or whatever. You just write an alter table statement, add constraint. You give it a name like UC employee. Then you just say NIC EPF combination is unique. Right? You can use a unique constraint. Right? NIC EPF combination, comma separated one, and it must be unique. Okay. Unique NIC EPF combination. Right? Alter table this at constraint. So when you do few past paper, right? Do at this topic is there for last 3 years, I think. So you will see that almost every year they are asking this kind of questions, right? So therefore, don't worry. And of course, I told you that you must familiar with all the possible constraints. Okay. Maybe after the class, I will share you the SQL note of the semester 2 students. So we have discussed these things. Of course, we discussed that for you guys also, maybe about 2 years back. Anyway, I will share that SQL one. Okay. Maybe just that 2 or 3 pages. Okay. Right. Third one. Change the SQL script to enforce an additional constraint called FK project that would ensure data integrity between both employee and project table. So that means referential integrity constraint, right? Foreign key, right? Change the SQL script to enforce additional constraint called FK project. That means basically the foreign key. But when you are creating the foreign key, make sure that but they don't say whether it is restrict or cascade or whatever, on update, on delete, right? So therefore, I hope just because they are not saying, right, anything else, anything like that, but it's always better to say, right, rather than just creating the foreign key, maybe on update, restrict or cascade, because the examiner has not mentioned which one they want to enforce. Right? I think either examiner will just create a foreign key without on delete or update. But if I go to the exams, I will create the foreign key with on delete, on update constraint as well. But I will just put something like cascade at least. Okay. At alter table employee at constraint, that is your foreign key. Remember, foreign key, you have to refer to the our field name, references, other tables field name. So examiner has not mentioned anything about the on update to on delete. So the examiner is only interested in creating the foreign key, right? Creating the foreign key. So that is why I told you maybe the examiner will just create the foreign key, or examiner will create the foreign key with on update and on delete. But examiner has not referred to on delete on update what to do. He has only created the foreign key. But this is assuming that the table is already there without the foreign key, so therefore it has to be alter table. Okay. Right. Foreign key, your field, references, the referring table, and its field. Okay, its field. Right. B. Write a trigger, name best employee. That means create to replace trigger best employee, right? That accepts insertions and updates into the performance table. That trigger is going to be trigger for insert and update on the performance table, and check the score of each employee. Right? Check the score. Do we have the performance table here? Yes. Right. So there's something called score. Employee ID, project ID, score, evaluator ID. So for this employee, for this project, this is the score, and it is evaluated by this particular person. Maybe he's another employee. Okay. He must be another employee. Okay. Right. So it is, we are going to write it for the performance table. Okay, that trigger. Okay, now let's read it. If the score is greater than or equal to 10, right? Now, if the score that you are going to insert or after updation, right? Maybe if it is a fresh insert, if the score is greater than or equal to 10. If it is update, hopefully the new value is greater than or equal to 10. Okay. Because usually it must be new value, not the old value. That employee will be automatically inserted into a new table called employee of the year. So then it has to insert it into the moment the score is greater than 10. If it is an insert, or automatically there's another insert to the employee of the year. Or when you update it, if the score changed to something greater than 10, you have to do that insert. Okay, so that means we have to assume that there's another table, right? Employee of the year. Do they mention about employee of the year table? No. So then we'll assume there's a table called employee of the year. They say which contains two attributes, employee ID and project ID. Right. So you just have the employee ID and project ID. Note, assume that the score is value between 0 to 20, and updates are done only to the increase the score value. So that means you are updating only that score value. You are not going to update anything else. Okay. Write down any constraint that should be enforced to ensure consistency of data. right? So you have to make sure that the consistency of the data is ensured. So ensured means whenever there is a insert with score greater than 10 or update and the new value is greater than 10, we have to make sure that you are inserting a record to the employee of the year table. I think we can do it using trigger. Yes, because this is not, I think we have to, because there's insert also. So that kind of things has to be done by trigger. Stored procedure is not going to work because this has to be triggered. Okay. So we can write a trigger and we call it best employee, and it has to operate on insert and update. Okay, insert and update. And do we have to check a condition? Oh, we can write a if condition later. Now there are two options, right? One person may say, let me close this. Right, one person might say, shall we have that condition here? Or shall we have if condition? I think it's better to write it here, right? For each row, when new, what is that value? New score value, right? New score value is greater than, so we can add it as the condition, right? Right? When new score is greater than 10. Okay. So then, yeah, so then you don't need if else condition. You just have to write the insert, because this trigger is going to be triggered only when that value is greater than 10. Then, or else you have to write if statement here. New blah 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 is greater than 10. Then you don't need this when here. Okay. So you don't have to any variable or nothing. You just have to write the insert. It's a very simple one. Right? So let's look at it. You can see that the body has only the insert. Right? No variables, nothing. Create or replace trigger. The trigger name they have given. After insert or update, because usually first you do that and then do this, right? If it is before insert to update, that is also okay, but business wise it make more sense, right? You do your main task, then do your other tasks. Okay, so therefore after is better, right? It's more common sense. And for each row, when, now we can see that they have used it here. I told you that is better rather than using an if statement here. Of course, you can use if statement also, but it is performance wise, this is better, right? So you can remember new score. So this one is not using the colon, but I will use the colon also, because in Oracle we use the colon. But anyway, they are not very strict on sometimes. Okay, but other than that, this is perfect Oracle trigger. Only thing is you have to use the colon here. Okay, right. So that's it. It's very simple, straightforward one. Right. What about the next question? 1 mark for any correct constraint identification. Referential integrity constraint between emp ID and evaluate ID in performance table and employee ID and blah blah blah. Project ID performance table should be equal to the project. What is that question? What is that one? Do they ask anything else? So write down any constraint that should enforce and ensure the consistency of the data. So that means we have to do this, and I think we have to write any other things, right? So you can see the questions are not very clear. So I thought they are only expecting the trigger, because they are talking about this. They are talking about this, but the examiner has given marks to, I think, just 1 mark to any other constraint. For this, examiner has given 5 marks. That is fair. But 1 more marks is added to any other constraint as well, because I think, because it says write down any constraint that should be enforced to ensure the consistency of data, right? Because this is not to ensure the consistency of data. This is to just to enter into the table, right? So other triggers, other constraints like referential integrity constraint, where we can check whether this particular evaluate ID is a valid ID in the employee table. Whether this project ID is a valid project ID in the project table, because those two are going to be the foreign keys. So for writing down one of those, examiner has given one more marks. So that is basically referential integrity, because that is fair, right? Because the question says, actually I was not paying attention to that. Write down any constraint that should be enforced to ensure. But anyway, the examiner has given it only 1 mark. 5 marks is given to this main task. Okay. I think that's it. No, it's not yet. Right? It's a big question. Right. Create a row level trigger name display salary difference. That is exactly what we did. Okay. As example. That would fire for insert, update, or delete operations performed on employee table. This trigger should display the previous salary, new salary, and the difference. So that is what exactly we did. Okay, so the examiner has also taken that example. So this is the example in the tutorials point also. Right? So that we did. Okay. So they have anyway. Examiner has not worried about checking whether null and other things, but you better, because otherwise it's not that good. Okay, now examiner is referring to the column, right? You can see now examiner, this is exactly the what Oracle. Anyway, if you see DBMS output put line, that is only available in Oracle. DBMS output put line is only available in Oracle. So all the past paper questions are referring to the either pure Oracle or something very close to Oracle, something like a pseudocode, but it's pretty much based on Oracle. So therefore, don't look at other technologies like MySQL, Microsoft SQL, because they use sometimes quite different syntax. Okay, then you are getting more and more confused. Right. So then still it's not over. I thought that is over. If the following SQL statement was executed, what would be the result of the trigger in the part A, C above? Now you have the trigger. It depends on the way you write the trigger now. Okay. Because this guy, the examiner has not considered the null values and other things. Okay. If you consider the null values, then according to your trigger, you have to write the output. Okay. So now this is an insert, just a simple insert. Okay. Yeah, just a simple insert. But when you are inserting, remember the all salary is null or no value is there. So therefore, previous salary is going to be empty. The new, according to this one. Okay. And the new salary is going to be 25,000, and the difference is going to be, I don't think it is 25,000, because when you have no all value is empty, I think it is going to skip this. Okay, so that is why it is always better to check that and at least initialize it to 0 or something. Okay. Okay, I'm not very sure. Maybe this is blank. No, they are just saying that the new salary is this, the salary difference is that. But I think if you really execute it, you are not going to get this output. Okay, I think it's going to skip this line. Okay, just double check. Okay. But anyway, I don't think the examiner is going to be very strict, right? Examiner is going to just check whether you have understood the basics. Okay. Is it endo still there? Oh, still there. Okay. Write a procedure name, update salary. Still there. This is the first time we are having the stored procedure, right? Update salary, EID amount to update the salary by adding the given amount for any given employee. So that means the stored procedure must be having two parameters, in parameters, the employee ID and amount. So then in your stored procedure, you have to update. You just have to write update statement, right? Update employee, set amount set salary equal salary plus amount, where employee ID equal this EID. Right? EID. It's a very, very straightforward update statement, right? And that's it, right? They are not asking you to send how many records are blah blah blah, right? Usually only one record, right? So just the update statement must be there in your stored procedure, but we have to write it like create or replace stored procedure as blah and two parameters, right? I will say both are in parameters, etc. Okay. Right. Create or replace procedure update salary, EID in char, data type, amount in float, right? So they have just taken it as char. I will go for something like number. It doesn't matter. Okay, why they have taken a variable? I don't know. Okay. Oh, they have select the salary and update it, but actually, but we could have just written the update statement, right? So we don't need to do like that, because in the update statement you can just write it straight away. So this is sort of additional. Just a single update statement is going to work. Some single update statement make it stored procedure call examine over select but this is unnecessary thing, right? Because we can just straight away write update statement. Okay. Commit එකකුත් දාලා තියෙනවා යා. හරි. මේ select එකකුයි update එකකුයි දෙකක් කරපුවාම හරි. But actually an update is going to work. Okay. ඔකට select එකක් කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ ඇත්තටම. මම දැන් ඇයි එහෙම කරේ කියන එක මටත් හිතාගන්න බෑ හරි. Right. So that's it. Okay, we'll do one more paper. Papers දෙකක් කරාම ඒක නම් උඩට මැදේ වට අනිත් එක ඒතකොට නිකම් තේරෙයි යා. We'll do 2019 paper. 19. Write down two common uses of database triggers. I told you that examiner is going to ask what are the triggers, use of triggers, right? You can log events, you can enforce additional constraints, right? Right? So two, right? So basically you can log things and also additional constraints. And any other things like any business related things, like remember we discuss a trigger to write to the employee of the year. So that kind of things also you can do, some business related things. And long list is there. Okay. Write down three differences between trigger and stored procedure. You must be able to write down those things, right? So trigger is automatically triggered on events, whereas stored procedures you have to call. Trigger is bound to a table. Stored procedure is not bound to one particular table. Okay. So what else? For trigger, three, right? Three tunakana. Yeah. So stored procedure, you have parameters, right? In parameters, out parameters, return values, etc. Whereas trigger, no, it's just in the database, which we will. It has only access to the SQL statements, new old values, and the that particular table records old values, nothing else. So user can't send anything to the trigger. So likewise your thing. So just triggers are implicitly called, right? Stored procedure can pass parameters where triggers can't, right? While creating a trigger, triggering events and action has to be specified, yes. But stored procedure you can call it from any time. Trigger can call a specific. That is a very important point. I forgot to mention. A trigger can call a stored procedure, right? When a trigger is triggered, inside the trigger you can call a stored procedure. But stored procedures cannot call a trigger, because triggers are triggered only when that event happens. And also another point is stored procedure can call another stored procedure. Okay, so that we didn't do it, but that is possible. You can even try out that. Okay, stored procedure can call another stored procedure, just like method calls, method chains. Okay, but triggers cannot call anything. Trigger cannot call another trigger or stored procedure. Right, consider the table employee and evaluation. You can see pretty much the same tables, okay? As given below to keep track of the employees and the job evaluation records. So you can see carbon copy of the 2020 page, or the 2020 is carbon copy of the 2019. write down a stored procedure at emp evaluation. These are the parameters, employee ID, sys date. Now remember, they are referring to the sys date. ඒක තමයි මම මේක බලා ගන්න කියලා. මොකද්ද? මේකේ තියෙනවා date can. මම කිය tutorial එකෙන් බලා ගන්න කියලා ඒක තමයි. So here you can see date and time. හරි. ඔක sys date ගැන කියන ඇති අනිවාර්යෙන් ඇතියා. time stamp ගන්න කොහොමද? current date time එක ගන්න කොහොමද කියලා ඇතියා. Go through it, okay? Anyway, you can just guess it also from the question, but don't rely on guessing. Right? So this is the system date. Yeah, sys date and scope. To insert records to the evaluation table. With respect to the evaluation of an employee, sys date is the date on which the evaluation is performed and score is on. That means it looks like just a, not the current time stamp. Maybe the user is sending the date. Is performed and score is an integer value between 1 to 10 given based on the performance of the employee. So you are getting the employee ID, you are getting the date, right? So that will be your evaluation date, and the user will be sending the system date. That is okay. And our task is insert the record into evaluation table, right? It's very easy, just to insert. And do we have all the things? Yes, employee ID is there as the parameter. We can use the sys date parameter as the evaluation date, and scope is there. And we don't have the job ID and the department ID. Is it to insert? Yeah, it is to insert. Then how can we get the job ID and department ID? Maybe those are null fields. Okay, maybe those are null fields. Or should I take it from the employee table and put it there? Because the employee table has the job ID and the department ID. And so we need job ID and department ID. Since they are asking us to write a stored procedure, right? So they are asking us to write a stored procedure, I think, because otherwise it's just a insert statement, right? Why do you need a stored procedure to write an insert statement? So I think we have to send the ID, employee ID to the employee table and get the job ID and department ID, and then do the insert statement with those two and the other 3 parameters, because then you have all 5 parameters. I think that is why they are asking you to write a stored procedure. That is my gut feeling. Okay. So since you are sending the employee ID, you don't have to take to a cursor. You can go row type. And row type එකට ගිහලා එතනින් එකපාර ගන්නත් පුළුවන් cursor එකක් වගේ fetch කර යන්න නැතුව. When you are taking insert into එකක් ගනිද්දි. එහෙම නැත්නම් insert into කියලා වල නිකන් variable වලට ගන්නත් පුළුවන්. Insert into කියලා අර දෙක විතරක් ගන්නත් පුළුවන් variable එකට. Row type වලට යන්න නැතුව. Okay. Either you can go for row type or you just take 2 variables. Right. You don't have to go for cursor. Then you do the insert. Okay. හරි දැක්කද? select කරලා දිනවා. හැබැයි cursor මේ row type වලටවත් ගිහිලා නැහැ. Right. So but here they are using the job ID and the department ID as the type from the table, right? But here you can see they are just select those 2 into our variables, job ID and department ID. Yeah, row type වලට ගිහිලා නැහැ. මේක තමයි පළවෙනි in out parameters වලක example එක ගත්තේ. From employee where this one. Now you have the 2 variables and other stuff are in your parameters. You can just do the insert, right? You can just do the insert. So these are parameters, emp ID, the today කියලා තමයි මෙයා අරන් තියෙන්නේ මේකට. today කියලා. මෙතනත් ඔයාලට පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් employee ගේ type එක කියලා පේනවා. That even in the parameters. Even in the parameters. But here they have taken it as date. Okay. ඒකත් අපිට ඕන නම් but ඒක අපිට ගන්න තියෙන employee ගේ නෙමෙයි මොකද අනිත් table එකේ type එක කියලා. එහෙම ගන්න තිබුණා. So anyway, but you can see examiner always write this commit statement. So you also whenever you write a stored procedure, make sure you have the commit statement, okay? Because the examiner, we never know examiner is being at least 1 mark to that commit statement, okay? Right, write down a trigger name, salary increment to increase the salary of an employee as given below based on the score value upon insertion of his evaluation record into the evaluation. So that means it's again insert to update trigger. If the score value is greater than 8, it must be 20% salary increment. If it is between 6 and 8, it must be 10% salary increment. So are we going to write 2 triggers or just 1 trigger? Write down a trigger, right? So therefore, now we will not be able to check this, right? Check this in the because there are 2 conditions in the when condition, right? Because when condition, because we have to do it 2 different things. I think better thing is skip the when condition, just make it happening for every insert and in every update. Then write a if condition and do those two different things. I think that is what I will be doing, right? That is what I will be doing. So I will skip that when condition, but I will check this because score is available. That is new colon new score. I will write a if else condition, and then I will do the is it insert? Write down a trigger name salary to increase the no. We have to increase the salary. So update statement where salary is salary into 120 for this one, or salary equals salary plus salary into 0.1 or just salary into 120, sorry 0.2. For else part, salary equals salary into 0.1 or salary equal salary into 0.1. Okay. And you can see that when condition is not checked because there are 2 different conditions. And if it is greater than 8, we are doing this update, and it is not the examiner is not using else if, but you can use else if as well. Oh, and remember this is new, okay? And if it is 6 and 8, then you are updating it by 1.1. Here you are multiplying by 1.2. Okay. So that is exactly we could have done it in the 2020 paper also. Remember 2020 paper, examiner is selecting the value and incrementing and doing update. I told you that this one update is enough, and here just one update is done because that is okay. You don't have to take insert, select and again do the update. Right, so that's it. So this is a different question. Okay, so I did 2 papers. So if you have any issues in 2018 paper, just let me know. I'm pretty sure it's self-explanatory. Pretty much the triggers, stored procedure questions are pretty much the same question is keep repeating, right? Right. So now we are going to have another class on Thursday. Okay, because yeah, Thursday we are going to have another class. And possibly Friday also. Friday class I am not 100% sure, but next week again I am free, right? Almost every day weekend. Don't worry, I will be free Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, every day because the semester 4 exams are next this weekend. So therefore, if you have anything, I am free. I'm free. But let's have a Thursday class. I just want to finish the distributed database and also do some more past paper questions on especially query optimization and indexing, and also maybe just 1 or 2 more past paper questions on transaction handling. I think transaction handling is enough, right? We did plenty of transaction handling past papers, including recovery. So, okay, we'll stop at this point. So, Wednesday, sorry, not Wednesday, Thursday, we are going to do the little bit of distributed database, another half an hour, then some past paper questions. And also we are going to do some past paper questions on query optimization on Thursday class. Okay, right, we stop at this point.